Hi, everybody. I am Blake Cabot. I am the owner of CareerLearning.com, and I have Nisha Trivedi, and she is an Emily Post graduate for certified business etiquette trainer. She's authored Business Etiquette for the Modern Workplace. She has a bachelor's degree and a master's, an MBA from the University of Michigan, and she is going to be telling us the best practices for business communication. So without further ado, Nisha, take it away.
Great, thank you.
One thing. If you have questions and stuff, just put them in the chat, and we'll save a little time at the end for that. Also, we have some resources at the bottom. So if you want to download this slideshow, or you can download it from there. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Blake. So yeah, as Blake mentioned, today we're here to talk about best practices in business communication. And so with effective communication, it is something that I would say is one of the biggest factors to your success, right? And the reason is that, in every organization I personally have worked in, this could be, corporations, this could be, with nonprofits, this could be, professional services, and also hearing about my networks experiences across industries. It seems to be that communication is really at the root of some of the issues you see at the workplace. And as a result, managers are, and all organizations are often frustrated with either ineffective or inappropriate communication. And so I think it's critical to think about the fact that it's not just what you say, but really how you say it. And that's probably an expression you've heard before, but that can present itself in, ways big and small. And as a best practice, communication should be clear, concise, and correct, which again sounds intuitive, but you'd be surprised, or maybe you've already seen how sometimes when this doesn't hold, it can definitely lead to issues in the workplace. And so some key questions when communicating to ask yourself are, first of all, what do I need to communicate? Is it just facts? Like for example, let's say you're organizing an event, then it's about the who, what, when, and where. Or are you having to go beyond that and share more nuanced or sensitive information, right? And so that's one of the questions you want to ask yourself to think, how do I tell this message? And also what is, and this actually goes to the second bullet point, what is the best communication medium for what I need to say, right? And there's different communication mediums. There's email, there's IM, there's phone call, there's text, and you really want to figure out what is the most appropriate for the message that you're trying to send. The third one, am I striking a tone that's considerate and respectful? And we're going to get into that in later slides, but a critical question. The fourth bullet, which is really actually relates pretty closely to the third bullet, which is, do I need to send this message now? Or, especially when tensions are high, should I wait and reflect to make sure I'm striking the right tone? Because sometimes, from what I've seen, tone can, especially in written communication, can come off in a way that it's not originally intended. And that can definitely ruffle some feathers as well. And then number five, am I comfortable knowing that this message may be heard, seen, printed, or forwarded to someone aside from the intended recipient, right? You might want to consider the fact that the message that you're supposedly sending to one person might end up having a wider audience, either intentionally or unintentionally, and you want to be really comfortable with what you wrote. And so at Emily Post Institute, as Blake mentioned, that I trained there when I learned about business etiquette, became a certified trainer, is the bulletin board rule, one of the most important concepts in communication, which is that if you can't put it on a bulletin board for anyone to read, don't email it, text it, IM it, leave it on a voicemail, tweet it, or post it, right? So if it's something that is really private and sensitive, then you might consider a non-written media of communication, a private conversation with the door closed, a phone call where you can't be overheard. And that way you can make sure that you're not, one, leaking confidential information, and two, leaving yourself open to misinterpretation. And so when words alone are your image, right? One thing that I had mentioned in the last slide is that in written communication, as you might have experienced, sometimes you might be able, you might be trying to communicate with one tone, you might be trying to sound neutral, even positive, but sometimes in written communication, it can sound really stark, or it can sound harsher than you were, going for. And so that's where you want to be, really, really clear on that, first of all, in terms of tone. And then also you want to really be able to assess, what exactly am I trying to communicate here? So I've seen that email is really best for
People are
communicating.
having problems seeing the slides.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
I don't know why. Oh,
Oh,
let
sorry
me
to hear
pin
that.
them. Let me try that. Hang on one
Okay.
second.
And let me know if I need to go back or anything at any point.
Carol can see them. So some people can, some people can't. I'll tell you what I'll do. For
Mhm.
those of you that can't, we are simultaneously transmitting this to LinkedIn. So click on that link. I can see them there for sure. So there's a link on LinkedIn. Okay,
Okay.
continue.
Thank you.
Sorry about
Thank you
that.
for letting me know, Blake. Thank you. So when words alone are your image, again, you want to be really clear on tone, and you want to be clear on the fact that, hey, that message could be seen by anyone, including people who are not originally on the list. And so the first point here is that you want to use email for communicating the facts: who, what, when, where. If you're trying to deliver something more nuanced or sensitive, like why or opinions or bad news, then you might want to use a different mode of communication. And I'm going to give a concrete example here. So I actually used to be on a nonprofit board. And at one point when I was on the board, I received an email from the executive director. My fellow board members and I received this email saying that one of the other executives would no longer be at the organization, right? And this would be the executive's last day, and this is the person you should contact in the interim until somebody new is hired, right? So he only communicated the facts. This person has left, last day effective today, here's you, email instead. Now, here's the thing. He knew, though, that my board members and I needed to know, well, what happened exactly? Why was this person leaving after, a relatively short tenure? So what he did for that piece of it is he actually called each one of us individually. So he called me and said, hey, Nisha, I wanted to, I communicated the facts over email, but in terms of what really happened, the issues we were seeing with this person, I wanted to make sure I ran it by you personally and privately to see if you had any questions. And so I thought he handled that brilliantly, right? He sent only the facts over email. He didn't say, okay, this was the problem with the person, just the facts, and then had private conversations with us about the more nuanced and sensitive information. And, he knew, and you should always remember that written communications live forever, right? Had he put that sensitive information in the email, it could have been misinterpreted, it could have been forwarded. What if it, reached the hands of a donor? That wouldn't have been good. And so that's just a classic example of how to divide out communications depending on the message you're trying to tell. And so some tips for what I call tension-free, or at least tension-reduced communication, is that, again, in the absence of, tone of voice or facial expressions or the things that you can communicate when you're in person or you're on the phone or on a video call, in written communication, interpretation defaults to the negative, right? Think about a text message that you see that says, okay, with the period, right? It might be seen as abrupt. But if you say, okay, to someone in a conversation, it might just be seen as something in the course of the conversation. And then point number two, email, texting, IMing, these written quick modes of communication. If it's a particularly difficult or sensitive situation, then I would say you might want to consider avoiding these methods of communication. Instead, you can pick up the phone and you can, even if you're in an in-office environment, visit someone in person. And so one, you can just start the communication this way and say, you know what, this needs to be a face-to-face conversation. I don't want my words to be misinterpreted. I want to make sure the tone comes across the way I'm intending. Or, if let's say you're texting or emailing someone and things become strained, at some point you might say, let's just pick up the telephone. Or let's jump on a Zoom call, let's even meet face to face if we can. I used to work in consumer packaged goods marketing, and I remember a time where I was talking to two other people, right, about a shipment that was about to go out on a product. One person said, my understanding was this. The other person said, my understanding was that. There was a back and forth, and I realized, what, we're not going to get things done over email. First of all, this is not efficient. Two, I don't want things to become strained. So I said, guys, why don't we jump on a call and figure this out? Within less than 15 minutes, the situation resolved. everyone was happy again. And it really showed that just switching to a call made all the difference. And with email communications, some common pitfalls are: one, emails containing incomplete, unclear, or incorrect information. You might have seen instances where there was an email asking you to do something, and you're like, "Wait, I'm not clear on what this is. Like, when is this due? Am I the person responsible for this?" You've probably been in that situation, or have you been in a situation where it says, "Please look at the attachment," and there is no attachment, right? This happens all the time. Or incorrect information, right? You might have gotten an email where it says, "Okay, the date and time of the event are this," and then you'll get a half hour later, "Oops, wrong date. This is the date." These are things that happen all the time. Mistakes happen, but it is a pitfall to be aware of. I remember once seeing a post on LinkedIn where it was from a recruiter who said that oftentimes she gets resumes from candidates, of course, but sometimes they're not resumes. They're a photo, they're lab test results, they're financial statements, things that people have accidentally grabbed off their laptop that are anything but their resume. So definitely something to be careful of. Point number two, inappropriate tone, like I've mentioned in the email. Sometimes you might say something that you think is perfectly neutral, but because there's no words or inflection or facial expression in words, it might just, again, seem more blunt than you intended, or just a bit more harsh, or again, a tone that you just were not going for. Three is using the wrong medium. Again, if you're communicating the facts, email is great. If you're communicating something nuanced or sensitive, or something that you feel could be interpreted in a negative way, it might be better just to have a live conversation. Point number four is misgendering, right? Definitely a topic to be mindful of these days, but it could be as something as simple as somebody having a gender neutral name. You don't want to assume the person's gender. I remember I actually did this early on in my career. A vendor who I'd been working with, I accidentally kept referring to the vendor as she. And then one of his colleagues corrected me and said, this person is actually a guy. And I remember feeling mortified. And, I told myself, don't do that again. Don't assume. And so that is the type of thing to be mindful of as well. And so some email best practices. First, let it simmer. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're writing an email and, maybe you're upset about something, right? Like somebody's getting back to you late, or there's been a misunderstanding. If you have the time to do so, don't respond right away. Resist the urge to just fire off that message. Think about it, like, okay, what am I trying to say? How do I want to say it? Is email even the best mode of communication for this, right? So kind of let yourself calm down before just firing off a message that you might regret later. Second thing is, be careful with the to and the subject fields. It sounds so basic, but I've definitely seen emails where the subject is, it's unclear, or there's been so many responses, to the email thread that the subject has just changed entirely, and it might be best to start a new thread. Be careful of who you're sending it to, be careful of who you're CCing and BCCing. And with that, be careful with reply versus reply all. Many of you have probably seen email threads where somebody will ask a question and then there will be a bunch of replies on top of that. And nobody needs to receive all of those emails. So, be careful with that. If you just need people to respond to you individually, if you're starting an email thread, make it clear. So that way they're not responding to the group and cluttering people's inboxes. The fourth point is about proofreading, right? Grammar, word choice, spelling. It sounds obvious, but I've seen a lot of, emails that, might have a lot of errors in them, and it doesn't, give off the best impression. So definitely, check before you send. Point number 5 is about avoiding text speak. And emoticons, you want to be careful about the smiley face in the email. Know your audience, right? If it's a, casual coworker, that might be fine. If it's an executive, think twice. Avoid all caps because, it comes across as screaming. So you want to be careful there. And show the appropriate level of formality, right? And so, with a coworker, you might have a more friendly tone, but remember, still, it's a professional email. With an executive, you might want to be more buttoned up. And this is something to really keep in mind. What's your relationship with that person? I'm good friends with a professor in my area, and he was mentioning how he gets these really casual emails from students, right? And he's a friendly person. He doesn't expect a lot of formality, but he gets emails that are more appropriate for, like, the person's buddy, right? And so that's something to be mindful of, be respectful to your audience. And same goes with texting. And some of the rules are pretty similar, right? With text, especially, you want to keep things simple. If you have a text that's just paragraph after paragraph, right? And especially in a professional context, you might think to yourself, is this too complex for a text, this message? And if so, switch to another method of communication. Again, think about tone before hitting send. I would say this is doubly true for a text, which is even easier to fire off, and you have even less space to communicate what you're trying to say. So tone misinterpretations are very possible. Proofread and be aware of autocorrect. We've definitely seen situations where, you write a word or a phrase and it is not what we meant at all. And it seems to be getting worse on iPhone, at least from what I've seen. So just really proofread before you hit a text, especially again, when it's in a professional context. Make sure you are sending it to the right person is the fourth point. And of course, this is true for any written mode of communication, but with text, it's so easy to send it to, your colleague instead of your friend, or, anybody with a similar name. It can happen even more easily, I would say. Be mindful of length. Again, going back to that first point, if the text is just getting really lengthy and complex, it might be better off as an email. Or if there's sensitive and complex information involved, you might want to even say, you know what, can I actually just call you and let's talk it through live. And be careful with emojis, know your audience. Again, same with email, you want to be careful with emojis, but with text, I mean, you have even more choices. I think that here it's really critical to be mindful of your audience, right? Is this a casual coworker, or someone you're in a friendly, have a friendly dynamic with? Maybe the occasional smiley face or something is okay, but don't overdo it. And if you're texting somebody who, with whom your relationship is more formal, you want to use, emojis very sparingly or maybe not at all. So just really, really use your best judgment there. And then, I wanted to end things on a more positive note, which is that one of the best and sometimes I think these days most underrated form of communications is a thank you note. I think that, in some ways it really can be a lost art. And to ensure an effective note, right? Which you might want to do in a number of situations. You've gotten a gift, you've been invited to an event, right? Which a lot of us are probably invited to a lot of networking events. You want to show your appreciation for the person who made it happen. Or of course, if you're in an interview situation. I coach MBA applicants, people who are applying to business school with their application strategies. And I always tell them, send a thank you note for, to your interviewer, and mention something in the conversation that resonated with you. And, the tips that I give them is, send it over email. I think these days, email is going to be probably the most effective mode of communication for a thank you note. And I would say send it within 24 hours, right? Things move quickly. So, send it quickly. And then, make sure that, email is the best method of communication. Most of the time it's going to be. The second point, though, is about written notes. And when are those needed? I would say a written note is needed for a more let's say even a more momentous occasion, right? So for example, of course, you probably know the written concept of written notes for, let's say, a wedding gift. I think something like that, a written note is what is appropriate. Let's say if you get a gift from somebody, I think a written note, certainly more than an email, is more appropriate. Let's say you have a client and they, maybe it's a milestone anniversary of working with them. I think that warrants a written note. Or if someone's just done you a really substantial favor, that's when I would prefer a written note over an email. But most of the time, if it's for something more low key, or for, let's say, an interview situation where you want the message to go out quickly, that's when an email is appropriate. I wouldn't generally send a text or call for a to convey thanks unless the original invite was over text. Let's say if somebody just texts you and said, hey, I want to give you a free ticket to this networking event. Are you interested? And that's over text. I think then you can thank the person the next day and say, hey, I really enjoyed that event. Thanks again. Then I think it's appropriate, but most of the time I think it's going to be an email. And then the note itself, I think you want to keep it concise and focused, right? 3 to 5 sentences is plenty. And so, that will ensure that it's to the point, but you're really expressing your thanks in a heartfelt manner. And the fourth point is if you met with several people, let's say you had an interview and you met with 4 or 5 people in one day, I would write a note to each person. I think that's a nice gesture. And that really enables you to not only connect with them individually, but also that goes to my next point is that you want to reference something about the interaction that resonated with you, right? So you don't just want to say, I enjoyed the event or I enjoyed meeting with you. Thanks for your time, although that will be part of it. But you also want to think about what was something in the conversation or what was something about the event that you found particularly compelling, right? Particularly your conversation with them. And so that's something you want to reference in the note, and that's just going to give it more sincerity and make it even more personal. And that's going to help you build your relationship with that person. And
A
so
couple
next,
questions.
yep.
One, Amy asks, format of a mail note, stationery with envelope or a note card?
Oh, that's a great question. For first of all, I mean, I commend you for sending a written note. Again, I think it's a lost art. I think either are fine, right? I think that stationery, if you are thinking about sending a longer note, but I think most of the time a note card is okay, right? Because again, if it's the 3 to 5 sentences you're going for, that's probably going to fit on a note card. But that's a great question.
And Annette asks, will the slides be shared in the participants? The slides are available right now. So if you click on resources button at the bottom, they're there. So you can just download it from that point. Thank you.
Great. And next, I wanted to show you just an example of what a thank you note might look like. And so, and this is something that's intended to be an email. And the note says, Dear Casey, thank you for inviting me to Thursday's real estate reception, right? So it's very clear what they're thanking them for. I greatly enjoyed connecting with my fellow agents. I'm especially grateful that you asked Jesse Burns to speak. They are truly an expert on commercial properties and gave us valuable industry insights and context on the latest economic outlook. So again, something in the conversation that resonated with them, right? That, they really enjoyed the guest speaker and they learned a lot, right? And why did they enjoy the event, right? So really, really make it clear why they're thankful, not just that they're thankful to attend. And then taking it a step further, in the next paragraph, it shows that, Taylor was really paying attention during their conversation with Casey, right? So clearly Casey is going on a trip to Spain. So said, I hope you have a wonderful trip to Spain. And I visited last spring and would be happy to provide restaurant recommendations, right? So really offering to give something to the person who invited him as well, which is, or them, which is a really nice touch. So that's an example of what an effective thank you note could look like, very specific at what they're thanking them for, what resonated with them, showing that you paid attention to the conversation, and if you can, offer something in kind as well. So I think that is, that's definitely the way to go. But yeah, with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. And I also wanted to share my information on the screen if you'd like to learn more about what business etiquette training might look like. I provide training on a variety of topics. Emailing, texting is just one of them. And my contact info is below as well. So with that, Blake, I'm happy to answer any questions that came up.
Okay. Most of the questions were, seemingly everybody had every different problem with Zoom. Some people couldn't see the slides. Some people couldn't see your face. Some people could only see the top of your head. Some people had a black box in the middle. We had every variety of problems. Gratefully, we're live streaming this on LinkedIn as well. So hopefully for those of you that could join us there, you got to see everything. And if not, you will be sent the video, so you'll be able to see it again. So any questions you guys have, just put them in chat or the Q&A. Be happy to pass them along. And Stacy had everything work fine. So, but we had all varieties of religious experience, of Zoom experience anyway. I have a question about, thank you notes and AI. So let's say I was writing a thank you note and I wanted to send somebody. So should I use AI as a tool for that or no?
That's a good question. The way I think about it is AI is a starting point, right? It shouldn't be the end all. So if you ask ChatGPT, hey, I want to write a thank you note to this person, what should I say? They might be able to provide you a good starting point, but if you make it the end all, what I've seen is that, ChatGPT, it tries its best and it can give you a starting point, but it doesn't know you. It doesn't know your tone of voice. It wasn't sitting with you there at the event. So it's not going to seem as personal as it could be, right? And again, with thank you notes, going back to the original, the slide for a second, it's pretty simple, right? It's, a handful of sentences. So, you might just want to think, about what are the points I would have mentioned in this note? How do I show my appreciation? What resonated with me? Is there anything I can do for this person? How do I show that I really paid attention during this conversation? And that's it, right? It's simple. This is not, Pulitzer Prize winning writing here. It's just a simple note saying, hey, thanks, and this is what I appreciated. And so you might find that it's not critical to use ChatGPT. Now, if you are stuck, use it as a starting point, but know that the quality is only going to be as good as how much information you give it. So you might end up giving it enough detail that it might have been faster for you to write the note without it. And you want to think about, okay, now that I have the starting point from AI, how do I really customize it so that it's from me?
Awesome. Well, I think unless there's any more questions, I appreciate your time. Nisha has a course coming up in May, and she is going to be teaching how to handle difficult people at work on May 1st. We've given a 20% discount code on there on careerlearning.com. We're going to have these once a week. So thank you guys for coming. Hopefully you'll come to the next one. And thank you, Nisha, and have a great trip to China.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, everybody. Really, really appreciate it. Yeah, again, as Blake mentioned, happy to, very happy if you'd come to the next webinar. And of course, you can contact me at the information on the screen. So thanks again so much for attending. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.